Welcome, esteemed viewers and loyal followers, to a new intellectual journey where we delve deeply into the hidden layers of words and sentences. Today, we pose a fundamental question that might entirely reshape our perspective on the historical texts we hold in our hands. Thank you for your precious time, and we invite you to stay with us as we unravel a profound linguistic mystery together. When we carefully contemplate any foundational message or sacred book, we intuitively assume that it must be entirely comprehensible to the people in whose language it was originally revealed. However, when we encounter a revered text filled with words and phrases characterized by intense ambiguity, sparking endless debates among the greatest linguistic scholars and early commentators, a profound question naturally arises. Why does this confusion exist, and why did the very contemporaries of the text, who spoke the language natively, fail to grasp its complete meaning? The foundational rule of linguistics dictates that if someone writes a message, it must be clearly understood by readers who belong to the sender's language, or at least by the vast majority of them. The presence of mysterious words, particularly those borrowed from non-Arabic origins that baffled even the earliest native readers, inevitably indicates that these terms do not stem from the core of their native tongue. Instead, they are undoubtedly borrowed words, descending from another language they did not fully comprehend, or perhaps they were literally translated into their newly emerging local dialect. Words, much like anything else in this vast universe, do not spring from nothingness. Nothing is ever born from a vacuum. Words do not simply sprout from the earth or fall from the sky in isolation. They are born, shaped, and evolved from other words, adapting to the complex needs of the speakers. They undergo fundamental generative processes, whether through derivation, morphological coinage, or direct translation. This concept is not a modern invention, but rather a contemporary linguistic adaptation of an ancient Greek philosophical maxim stating that nothing is born from nothing and nothing perishes entirely, but existing elements simply renew and separate once again to form new entities. It perfectly echoes the famous scientific principle attributed to the pioneering French chemist Antoine Lavoisier, who declared that in nature nothing is lost and nothing is spontaneously created. Rather, everything merely transforms from one state to another. When we apply this rigorous scientific and philosophical logic to the realm of linguistics, we realize that every new word entering a vocabulary must follow a similar path of transformation. It must either be coined through morphological processes, derived from roots already existing within the language itself, or brought down from an entirely different language through the complex process of translation. Since translation is essentially a multifaceted process of transformation and cultural negotiation, it is far from being a monolithic practice. The renowned English translator and scholar David Bellos provides a crucial framework by distinguishing between two primary contrasting types of linguistic transfer. The first approach is known as upward translation or target-oriented translation. In this specific method, the translator focuses purely on conveying the abstract meaning, strictly adhering to the stylistic and grammatical norms of the target language, while actively seeking to erase any lingering trace or structural influence of the original source text. This method usually occurs in historical contexts, when a text is being translated from a marginalized, subjugated culture into a dominant, prevailing, and widely spoken language. The second distinct approach is the downward translation, or source-oriented translation. Here, the translator adheres much more rigidly to the literal meaning of the words, consciously clinging to the grammatical structures, idioms, and stylistic nuances of the source language from which they are translating. This type of translation typically flows in the opposite direction, from a dominant, highly established culture into an emerging, local, and historically subjugated culture. Because of this strict, almost reverent literal adherence, we can clearly observe the undeniable linguistic fingerprints, syntactical anomalies, and traces of the original source languages embedded deeply within the target text. When we critically examine the Quranic text through this academic lens, we discover a multitude of ambiguous words that are originally literal borrowings from non-Arabic languages. The existence of these terms, which were unknown or incomprehensible to the text's contemporaries, strongly suggests they were borrowed from the dominant cultures and languages of that era, such as Syriac, Hebrew, Greek, and Persian. This linguistic ambiguity is not a mere coincidence. Rather, it is an inherent characteristic demonstrating that the text, at its core, functions as a translated work. It represents a downward, source-oriented translation from prevailing, dominant cultures into a local Arabic culture that was only just beginning to take formal shape. This is precisely why we witness the lingering traces and fingerprints of the source languages within the Arabic target text. The esteemed philosopher Paul Ricoeur beautifully noted that translation is essentially the embodiment of linguistic hospitality. Fascinatingly, this profound concept aligns perfectly with the linguistic meaning of the specific verbs associated with the revelation of the text. The verbs used in the text itself, such as anzala and nazala, carry the literal meaning of descending, settling, or being hosted in a physical or metaphysical space. The verb nazala literally means to settle down as a welcomed guest. Consequently, the historical process of the text's revelation can be profoundly understood as its systematic translation from an established dominant culture into a nascent Arabic culture, hosted gracefully as a linguistic guest. To put this into a modern linguistic perspective, consider the verse from Surah Yusuf. Indeed, we have sent it down as an Arabic Quran that you might understand. This can be logically reinterpreted to mean that a dedicated group undertook the translation of this book, hosting it as a guest in the Arabic language so that it could be read natively, allowing the local population to comprehend and grasp its profound meanings. The group responsible for this intricate translation was fully aware that this text was a curated translation of various scattered religious documents. Furthermore, they knew that most of these source texts were not officially recognized by the dominant mainstream religious authorities of the time, whether Jewish, Christian, or otherwise. They were highly conscious that this was a translated adaptation, not a uniquely original text emerging out of nowhere. It is even historically reported that one of the members of this intellectual group indicated that readers had the freedom to read and interpret the text fluidly, provided this interpretive freedom did not completely reverse or contradict the original intended meaning. Beyond the lexical and grammatical traces of source languages, there are explicit internal signals within the text itself that boldly support its nature as a translated work. Consider a verse from Surah Fussilat, a book whose verses have been detailed, an Arabic Quran for a people who know. One of the fundamental Arabic meanings of the verb fusilat is to clarify, explain, and elucidate in detail. Translation, in its absolute essence, is the detailing and clarification of meaning into another language, often requiring the translator to prefer one specific nuance over another. Here, the verb fusilat is used to powerfully denote the act of translation and linguistic transfer. The context of the subsequent verse in the same chapter reinforces this understanding. And if we had made it a non-Arabic Quran, they would have said, "Why are its verses not detailed? Is it foreign and Arabic?" In this specific context, detailing clearly refers to the complex process of transferring and elucidating concepts from dominant non-Arabic source cultures into the emerging localized Arabic target culture. When classical exegetes like Al-Tabari interpreted this verse, he stated that it meant its verses were explained and clarified specifically for a people who intimately understand the Arabic tongue. Similarly, Ibn Kathir explained it as meaning its profound meanings were clarified, expressed in clear, detailed Arabic words that are free of any linguistic obscurity. Both revered scholars, perhaps inadvertently, pointed out that the primary objective of formulating the text in the Arabic language was to enable native speakers to deeply understand and absorb it, thereby entirely eliminating their need to constantly refer back to the foreign texts of the people of the book. This is, in fact, the ultimate and universal goal of any translation process, for the translated text to effectively replace the source text, sparing the reader who does not know the original language from the daunting task of having to learn it or consult a foreign expert. The literary style of this translated text seems to have uniquely combined a free translation of meaning with the deliberate, careful retention of source text traces, a sophisticated method used to bestow a greater sense of majesty, mystery, and divine value upon the translated work. Translation that heavily focuses on accurately conveying the underlying meaning and intent to the reader is what the esteemed linguist Eugene Nida famously termed dynamic equivalence or functional equivalence. This approach translates the broader intentions and cultural functions of the source text rather than merely swapping individual words. Nida's groundbreaking concept resonates deeply with the historical vision attributed to Umar bin al-Khattab regarding the reader's inherent freedom as long as the core meaning is preserved. Both concepts advocate strongly against strict literalism, aiming instead to make the text accessible and culturally resonant. The translators masterfully blended this dynamic equivalence, presenting clear meanings in an accessible Arabic mold, with downward source-oriented literal translation. This dual approach gave birth to a unique hybrid text, resulting in perfectly clear verses alongside completely ambiguous phrases that have perpetually puzzled major commentators.
It is highly probable that the translators fully committed to the target Arabic language whenever they knew the exact meaning of a phrase and could find a clear functional equivalent for it, producing the clear verses. Conversely, they resorted to the dominant source language, employing literal downward translation in specific scenarios, when they did not know the precise meaning, when they could not find a suitable equivalent in the developing Arabic language, or when they deliberately wanted to cast an aura of sacred magic and divine mystery over the text. This method produced the ambiguous verses and the mysterious disconnected letters. This is exactly where the profound linguistic analysis of Professor Christoph Luxemburg comes into play. Luxemburg compellingly argues that the influence of the Syriac language on the text in its earliest stages was monumentally greater than previously assumed. He demonstrated that many of the obscure expressions can be understood with absolute clarity if the reader possesses a solid grasp of Syriac and reads the Arabic text through the lens of Syro-Aramaic idioms. Numerous verses that appear linguistically incoherent make perfect sense once their Syriac origins, which may have been subjected to historical misreading or mistranslation, are taken into account. Luxemburg concludes that the early Arabic tongue cannot be fully comprehended without referring back to its foundational Syriac language. The grammatical rules governing this early text were far closer to Syriac grammar than to the classical rules later established for Arabic. Because Arabic was not yet a fully matured linguistic system, the early translators found it easier to directly coin words based on the original source text. These coined words were understood initially, but lost their precise meanings decades later. Consequently, later commentators were forced to invent meanings for these obscure words, trapping subsequent generations in an ever-growing chain of interpretive errors. Identifying these early errors and tracing them back to their Aramaic roots is absolutely essential for understanding the true sources of the text. It is crucial to note that the early compilers were genuinely honest when they refrained from attributing the text to themselves, as the original source texts they compiled belonged to a collective cultural background rather than a single known author. It appears they were highly sincere in their monumental national translation project. Translating and compiling multiple marginalized texts from various dominant cultures, specifically focusing on apocryphal and unofficial writings ignored by mainstream authorities, pumped fresh, vital waters into the emerging Arabic culture. By placing these previously rejected texts at the core of their new cultural identity, they gave the Arabic culture immense power and renewed momentum, altering the course of the Arab cultural river forever. In conclusion, we sincerely hope that this deep dive into the origins of the text and its language has provided you with a fresh, expanded understanding of the nature of this immense translational endeavor and its staggering historical impact. The mysterious words have opened a fascinating window for us, revealing how a language can serve as a gracious host to other languages, and demonstrating that translation is never merely a transfer of words, but a profound process of building an entire culture from the ground up. Thank you so very much for your outstanding attention and continuous support. If you found this intellectual exploration engaging and insightful, we warmly invite you to support this enlightening content. Please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss our future explorations. Most importantly, leave a like and share your valuable thoughts with us in the comments section below. Your active engagement is the vital fuel that keeps this community thriving and blooming.
We look forward to seeing you soon in upcoming episodes that will continue to illuminate hidden corners of knowledge. Until next time, take care.